Hey folks, I'm Brian Holland from the World of Darkness community team at Paradox Interactive, and in this Storyteller advice video I'm going to go over how to establish consent for horror themes in your games, and how to direct your story without railroading your players or losing track of your overall vision for the plot. But first, let's get into how this is everybody's World of Darkness. Vampire is a game of personal and political horror, and the themes explored in Vampire will not always be for everybody. Our community, and indeed our world, is populated by folks with vastly different experiences, and it's important to be mindful that those experiences will never be identical to your own. As such, each scenario you prepare for a game of Vampire will need content warnings, which outline the sensitive topics and horror that will be explored in your scenario. It's your responsibility, as the adjudicator of the story, to let all players know these content warnings well in advance of the game. Some players may be slightly uncomfortable with some of the topics, but may be happy for them to be included as long as there is a fade to black or otherwise not explicit description of the content. Other players may find one or more of the content warnings to be a hard line for them, which means they will not want to participate in the story at all. Different players again may have no issue with any of the content at all, but that doesn't mean you should ever assume. The best thing you can do is have a thorough conversation with your players prior to fleshing out any of your scenarios. Make sure you're aware what, if any, topics are a no-go area for your players so that you can craft your scenario with that in mind, as opposed to having to rewrite something later on. Your task as a storyteller is to communicate with your players free of judgment. Allow players to express when and where their consent to participate in the game begins and ends. The essay Advice for Considerate Play in the appendix of the PDF version of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition is required reading for all storytellers, as it goes into all of these topics and how to explore them at your table in far greater detail than I ever could. Once you've got your scenario name, your outline, and your dot-pointed scenes, this is going to act as your script. But you're the director of the story. It's your job to bring it to life, to colour it in, with the help of your players. Even if you change nothing about how your script is written, no two versions of that story will be identical. The unique flourish you give your game, coupled with the interaction of the player characters, will be more than enough to make the scenario feel truly unique. When you sit down to run a game of Vampire, you're already adhering to telling the story within the bounds of a shared world. The World of Darkness has rules, not just mechanical rules, but thematic ones. For example, vampires can't just start walking around in the daylight completely unaffected. What is consistent for players is the lore, setting, and information outlined in the officially published books in the V5 line. It's important not to think of these as restrictions that hamper your creativity as a storyteller. Remember, you're not required to follow your script beat by beat, or even scene by scene. For example, if you had originally planned that a trail of clues leads the characters to a closed public library, there is no reason you cannot change that location to suit the needs of dramatic propriety. If you happen to have 3 Nosferatu characters at your table, then skulking around a closed public library probably isn't going to be particularly dramatic. You might instead move that location to a happening nightclub. Suddenly, the Nosferatu players are presented with a much more dramatically interesting hurdle to overcome. While I encourage you to stick to the script of your scenario wherever possible, you still have the flexibility to move things, adjust them, and tell the same story in a slightly different fashion should you wish. When you're running your game, and you've got your outline, and your dot-pointed scenes, and all your carefully thought-out plot points, and you've got a really clear vision of how you want the story to go, you have to be really careful to avoid the trait known as railroading. It's important to remember that, yes, while there is a clear path through the story you're going to tell, the players still need to be able to influence that story. As such, you don't want to get caught out telling players that their ideas don't work and that they cannot do something, or that their particular attempt at addressing a situation will automatically fail just because it doesn't directly gel with your scenario. The only way to be properly prepared for the curveballs that your players will inevitably throw at you is to make sure that your story and your scenario is flexible. If there is a scene you're particularly excited to run, don't make it in a specific location in case the characters don't end up taking the bait you throw at them to go into the abandoned bowling alley. We all have our weaknesses as storytellers, and to overcome them, simply make notes. Write down what compulsions would suit each particular scene. Write down some other options that a player might suggest to overcome a particular obstacle. Jot down a few names and backgrounds of mortal SPCs that may be lurking around in case a character urgently needs to feed, or if you need to inject an otherwise stagnant scene with a curious onlooker. When a player explains how their character is intending to address a situation in a scene and it's not something you'd prepared for, you need to do your best to make it work. Trust me, your players will never know when you're thinking on your feet. Your storyteller screen is your friend. Take a moment, take notes, and if you're ever unsure of what to do, always come back to the core theme and mood that you've established for your story. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, be sure to comment and subscribe and share it with your friends. I've been Brian Holland from the World of Darkness community team at Paradox Interactive. In our next video in this series, I'm going to be going over how to deal with bestial failures and messy criticals, how to use the beast to your advantage, and really explore the mechanics of monsters that V5 puts forward to keep the game feeling vampire. Thanks so much.